Good morning, metalheads of the internet, and welcome to a brand new episode of the Metal Meltdown. Today we are talking about the Great Heathen Army, a new studio album, the 12th overall, from Swedish melodic death metal, Viking metal icons and pioneers, Amon Amarth. Of all the metal bands to pop out of Sweden in the mid to late 90s, Amon Amarth is without question one of the biggest, one of the most successful, one of the most well-known, and one of the fucking corniest. They've sold hundreds of thousands and millions of records, they've toured the world dozens of times. I saw them at the Rockstar Energy Drink Mayhem Festival in 2013 with a slew of other bands, and then again at a headlining show in 2019 with Arch Enemy and At the Gates opening for them. On both occasions, they quite literally stormed the stage in a Viking ship or atop a giant Viking helmet, wearing Viking armor, holding Viking weapons, and that's because they're kind of constantly cosplaying as Vikings. Their music in turn pulls heavily from fantasy literature and from Norse and Viking and pagan mythology and history. Usually all of this is coupled with a slew of epic and muscular heavy metal and death metal riffs and rhythms and hooks. I mean, I remember being absolutely blown away by Twilight of the Thunder God and Surtur Rising when I heard both of them for the first time as a wee little babu baby just beginning to learn about death metal and specifically melodic death metal. Many people would consider Amon Amarth to be one of the more consistent death metal bands out there. As such, there's never really been much demand for them to switch things up visually or musically. And those people aren't wrong. I mean, Amon Amarth is a very consistent band. You know, you can always kind of rely on them for some good old-fashioned, stupid, corny, meaty metal goodness. But I don't know, their last few albums have been just a little bit weak and unremarkable for my personal liking. And unfortunately, not only is the Great Heathen Army not better, I'd argue it's worse. I would argue that it's more predictable, more generic, more cookie cutter. I'd argue that it's dumber and blander and flatter. It has absolutely nothing original to say or offer whatsoever. It very much feels like a repeat, a rehash of what the band was doing on Berserker, but here with significantly less enthusiasm or energy. Like, my first thought after listening to this album all the way through for the first time was, this feels like something that Amon Amarth just kind of crapped out in an afternoon so that they'd have an excuse to go on tour and make some more money. And to my genuine surprise, that's kind of exactly what Amon Amarth did. They had a lot of COVID downtime and just made an album because, fuck it, why not? As vocalist Johan Hegg recalls in this press release courtesy of Looters PR, at first we thought we'd just see how it played out and maybe book a couple tours, but fairly soon we realized it was going to be a long hiatus. When it was getting close to being a year, we thought, fuck it, there's no point in going back out on the road with an old album, so let's just start working on new stuff instead, so that's what we did. Don't get me wrong, folks, I didn't expect Amon Amarth to be binge-watching Tiger King and playing Animal Crossing and learning how to bake bread the way that everyone else did during the early days of the COVID-19 pandemic. Totally makes sense that a group of professional musicians would want to work on new music. Why not? You literally have all the time in the fucking world. Makes perfect sense. But if your inspiration for writing and recording a studio album is A, simply to alleviate boredom, and B, so that you'll have something to promote on tour when you can finally go back out successfully on tour, then quite frankly, it seems obvious to me that you wouldn't end up with a very interesting record. Case in point, the Great Heathen Army. Opening track Get in the Ring, for instance, is a dumb, edgy death metal bruiser in which Johan Hegg basically just talks about wanting to fight people, wanting to beat them up. Why? I don't know, because he's better than us, I guess. That's why. The chorus is so ineffective and uneventful and forgettable that one could very easily argue that there aren't any proper hooks or melodies on this track to begin with. The riffs are weak and repetitive as fuck. The entire track ultimately is as dynamic and as exciting as a plastic bag filled with Hellmann's mayonnaise. I would say that this particular Viking mead has been watered down, but that would not be accurate. I think it would be more accurate to say that I've just been served lukewarm tap water. There's no mead to speak of here whatsoever. Tracks like Find a Way or Make One and the Great Heathen Army spend so much time monotonously chugging along that I find myself forgetting about them literally as I'm listening to them. Then there's Hide Run, which is a lazy, sluggish, and slightly pathetic attempt at an epic, thunderous heavy metal anthem for the ages. The closest I come to having any legitimate fun with this record would be when it indulges in some more explosive and aggressive kind of Swedish death metal shit, like on tracks like Odin Owns You All, Skaggle Rides With Me, Saxons, and Vikings, the latter of which stands out as being probably the best cut on the record. It's genuinely kind of epic and gets the blood pumping thanks to a pretty strong guest spot from Biff Byford of Saxon fame. But even these songs lost their luster on repeat listens, and especially when I began comparing them to some of the bigger tracks from, Twilight of the Thunder Gods, Surtur Rising, and all that shit. Doesn't help that this thing ends on a pretty unsatisfying note, too, with the slow and bloated Serpent's Trail. I admire the more epic ambitions of this cut. It's moodier. It definitely tries to create like a really cinematic atmosphere and vibe, which I appreciate, but it's ultimately just not that interesting, and it takes way too long to get to the fucking point and to get to a really cathartic and satisfying conclusion. Don't get it twisted, folks. I'm not asking Amon Amarth to write a high-concept rock opera or to do some crazy, artsy-fartsy, Imperial Triumphant-esque genre fusion nonsense. If Amon Amarth want to just dress up as Vikings and sing about Odin and Thor and Loki and play death metal and swing swords and axes and shit on stage, good for them, fucking go for it. But is it too much to ask that they also deliver something legitimately interesting, good, fun? I really don't think it is. Maybe the long-time Amon Amarth fanboys will be happy, like the guys who dress up in cosplay to go to a fucking Amon Amarth concert. Those motherfuckers are real. I've seen them. I know you're out there. Maybe they'll love this. Good for them. I fucking don't. I would much rather revisit literally any of the band's older records. Hell, even Yum's Viking, I would say, had a few more standout tracks than this. This is just fucking weak. Their weakest record to date, I would say, so I'm feeling a 1.5 out of 5. I've literally no reason to return to this record, especially not when, again, records like Twilight of the Thunder God, with Odin at her side, Surtur Rising, Deceiver of the Gods, already exist and are significantly better. Like, they're doing this exact shtick, this exact formula, and doing so way, way, way fucking better. Amon Amarth is coming to Toronto in December, and I'll go because Carcass and Obituary and Cattle Decapitation are opening, and I fucking love those bands. But if Amon Amarth's setlist is comprised primarily of material from this record, I won't be sticking around for very long. 1.5 out of 5. I'm sorry, folks, but I think this is honestly a really bad record. It's bland, it's flavorless, totally forgettable, easily Amon Amarth's most boring and generic record to date. And that is it for the Metal Meltdown. I'm not an expert, nor do I claim to be, so what do you think? Do you like this record? Do you not like this record? And what do you want to hear from me next? And thank you for watching. Make sure you press subscribe right here so you get updates on the Metal Meltdown fucking immediately. And as always, you have yourself a fantastic fucking day.